It's a couple minutes after, so I'm going to get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Joran Oppelt. I'm the founder of Illustrious Consulting. I'm really thrilled to be joined by some special guests today for this call and for this conversation we're about to have. I am joined by Lauren Green, who is and Lauren, if you can continue to let people in from the waiting room as they enter, as I kind of press on with the program here. Lauren is a contributor to the new book, which I'll talk about in a minute. She's also the owner and executive director of Dancing with Markers. We've got Mark Tippin on the call today, and he is also a contributor to the afterword of the book. He is the director of strategic next practices at Mural. Akasha is joining us as well. He is a contributor to the book, and he is a partner at Cultivating Leadership. And we are going to get into a little discussion here about the book that we all pulled together to birth here this year. It's been a few years in the making, and we're excited that it's finally out. The name of the book is Facilitation, a Human-Centered Guide to the Art of Collaboration. And we're so thrilled that all of you would take the time out of your day to be here with us. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can follow along with me in a mural. All right, so here's the picture of the book cover, the book that just came out, that book that I think we peaked at number 24 on that business meetings bestseller list, just behind Dan Rome's Back of the Napkin last couple of weeks ago. So we're hoping to continue that trend of, climbing the charts, as they say, continuing to try to get the word out about this book. So please spread the word to your colleagues and friends. Yes, and here are the people that we have on the call today. Every session, every workshop, every meeting, everything we do, how we do anything is how we do anything. So we're going to do the ORs here at the beginning of the call. The objective, how we know we're in the right meeting and we have the right people. The objective for today is to discuss the dimensions of great facilitators and hopefully convince some of you to buy the book. That's the objective today. We're just being transparent. But to get into the dimensions of great facilitators, we've built an agenda that is going to take us into certain sections of the book that kind of shine some light on some of those areas. So the agenda is that we're going to briefly take a tour of the table of contents. We're going to take a look at the four-quadrant model that we outline in the book, talk a little bit about the lines of development that are mapped within each of those quadrants, that could be called lines of development or lines of intelligence that show up in each of those quadrants, and a little bit about how we can kind of self-evaluate or evaluate others in the field, whether we're doing facilitation or training or teaching. We'll hopefully have lots of time for Q&A, and then we'll bring it to a close. Some ground rules is that you're here on the call, and we're glad for that. So appreciating you being present and, closing doors to your office or, closing email tabs and kind of being attentive to the conversation and to the work we're about to do. And similarly, be focused. Take your cameras on if you can. We would love to see you over the course of the conversation, and go ahead and mute your microphone until we open it up at the end. If you have questions over the course of the call, go ahead and put them in the chat. Mark and Lauren will be harvesting the chat for your questions and putting those on the Q&A board, a Q&A section of the mural. You can see that at the very end, and we'll get to that at the very end. It's good for the rules. And in addition to myself and Lauren and Mark and Akasha, you all have a role to play as well. You all are either currently facilitators or trainers, or you are emerging facilitators. And we say that every, parent, teacher, band leader, spiritual leader, you name it, all have the makings of great facilitators. So no matter what you do, there is facilitation that you most likely do in your day-to-day. and you have something to learn or insights to gain from this work. Here's just a little example. I've just taken shots of the book and like laid them in because I'm really excited and proud of the design on this one. We worked with Bowen Imagery on the layout, and there's an example of a spread that has a nice pull quote from Chris Johnston from his amazing book House of Games, about how facilitators create for the participants what he calls great reckonings in small rooms. The table of contents here kicks off with a foreword from David Sibbett, which is really great. We've got an introduction, a little bit about how and why the book was written. A brief history, which is what we covered on the last call we had, which is a visual timeline of like, when was butcher paper invented? When were the Post-it notes created? When was the Sharpie made, right? When did the Art of Gathering come out? When did Interaction Associates come onto the scene? Like what the whole timeline of graphic facilitation and visualization. We did our best to include as much as we could there. But then we get into this section, what we call the fundamentals, the four fundamentals, being, behaving, bonding, and building. In that section, we've got contributions from various peers and experts in the field. Akasha's contribution, what self is the instrument, is in the being section. Lauren and our friend Brian contributed to the behaving section with a chapter called High Intensity Interval Training for Facilitators. We've got a really great contribution in the bonding section, all about the pushback from our interview with Michelle Royal, and then the quadrant 4 about building, which is largely maps, tools, frameworks, concepts, models, things like that. We included in there a section on the minimum viable graphic design that any facilitator needs, whether that's sketchnoting or composition if they're capturing visual notes, or designing slides. Looking for the basics of graphic design that everybody kind of is like, well, I'm not an artist, right? We hear that a lot. You don't need to be, right? And so we give you some of the very basic vocabulary. There's a big section then on inquiry. Facilitators always, if you notice, facilitators as well as coaches have a list of really great questions that they like to ask. And some of them have their top 5 go-to questions. We really did a lot of collecting of those questions and talked about what makes a good question, how important it is to reflectively listen as a facilitator, and that golden ratio of speaking versus listening. We get into virtual facilitation, and we give a toolbox of some basic facilitator tools you can use when you're first starting out. That afterword there provided by Mark and our friend Jim on the future of collaboration design is a really great exclamation point at the end of the book, gets us into a very forward-looking state. And then there's an appendix with a lot of like other checklists and playlists and email templates, and there's a great glossary. There's all kinds of stuff. So that's the TOC and what you can expect in the book. And here is our model of the 4 quadrants. So I'm just going to pause for a minute because I haven't yet heard from the people on the call. I want to open it up to Mark and Lauren and Akasha, who have been familiar with the book, have seen the book, have been involved in putting this thing together. And before I go through this 4-quadrant model, I just kind of want to ask you guys, when you saw this 4-quadrant model and were like, what the heck does integral theory have to do with facilitation? And what was your initial response to this, kind of giving the tool in which we gave shape and frame to the work? Oh, Mark, it looks like you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've been called a maximizer by mentors and other people I've worked with. So for me, my happy space is, if you can imagine being at Disneyland and you walk up to that board and it has all the places you can go and it says you are here. I love knowing the extent of the domain and where I am, and then I can move through it. So for me, it was delightful and I seemed to share an affinity with whoever wanted to go to, let's have a general theory of everything about everything, and then figure out where we fit within it. So for me, it was a delightful thing to step into because it set the, I think, a proper scope for talking about a lifelong facilitation journey.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Laura and Akasha, anything to add before we kind of describe what these four quadrants are? No. Good. Good. I saw a thumb. Okay, cool. Well, then let me get into it. The quadrants are created by two axes. One is an axis that is the individual at the top of the model, and then the collective or the group on the bottom of the model. That y-axis then is the interior on the left and the exterior on the right. So which gives us the interior of the individual on the top left, which is what we call being, that interiority of the individual. And on the top right, it's the exterior of the individual. So it's how they're behaving, what they're doing. On the bottom left, it's the interior of the collective. So the interior experience of a group. And that's what we call in the book, we call bonding. That's what we, elsewhere we might refer to that as the we space, right? That interpersonal space. And in the bottom right, the collective exterior. So that's just kind of empirically anything you can point to in the world that you're able to map or manipulate. That collective exterior we refer to as quadrant 4. We named it building. And that, like I said before, that's largely where you find frameworks and tools, and maps and artifacts and assets and deliverables and things like that. So that's where we talk about those things. And those are the four quadrants. Today on the call, we want to focus on the left-hand side. We want to talk a little bit about being, the interior of the individual, of the facilitator, and then also the interior of the group in quadrant 3. So we want to focus on interiority on the call today. And I just want to give you a quick tour here of that being section. We've identified some of these lines of intelligence or development within that quadrant of being to be things like mindset or optimism or a belief in human potential. This is a big one for me as a coach and a facilitator. That one's indispensable. We find it important to be strengths focused, and there are a lot of tools and other things you can do to identify the strengths you can focus on, but being able to maintain a focus on strengths is an important skill as a facilitator. That confidence that you have, and we've identified authority in a few different ways throughout the book, because authority kept coming up, right? Presence, gravitas. They express a certain authority in the room. But authority comes from different places. So authority, as it's based on experience, expertise, we've identified that as confidence. So to be confident as a facilitator. Humility, right? Mitigating your ego, thinking of yourself as that Sherpa or guide up the mountaintop. And we've probably all as facilitators used that metaphor, on a canvas with a group is who's the guide and where are we setting up camp and what is our North Star, right? But thinking of yourself as that guide and not the leader of the campaign is a good start. And then courage is another one. Courage to kind of be assertive. Assertiveness is listed in quadrant 2 as a behavior because there are ways you can insert yourself into the conversation when need be. But the courage to do so is something that is more related to mindset. So these are and servant leadership was the last one. And we use the comparison to Hermann Hesse's Journey to the East and that tale of Leo, where it turns out that the little, the guy carrying all the gear turned out to I'm spoiling the end of Journey to the East for anybody who hasn't read it, but turned out to be the leader of the entire movement at the end of the book. So servant leadership is something we definitely want to demonstrate and model as a facilitator. And then problem areas in quadrant 1, and in our being, right? We want to watch out for things like our ego shaping or sabotaging this meeting to confirm a belief about ourselves, right? And then similarly, we want to watch for bias, and that is sabotaging the meeting to confirm a belief about someone other than yourself. Ego and bias are things to keep in check. Fear, right? Just however that's manifesting for you, whether it's imposter syndrome or fear that you won't finish the session on time, right? Mitigating your own fear in the moment can be a problem area in quadrant 1. And that reluctance to intervene, as we mentioned, assertiveness before, self-esteem, self-image based on winning, solving, or fixing. So I'm going to open it up to our contributors, especially Akasha, who was the contributor for quadrant 1, to kind of help us talk about why is it so important to have this focus on individual interiority when leading groups, or when facilitating groups, I should say.
Hey, thanks for that, Joran. Hi, everybody. I am mobile, so I'm in Charleston. I'm usually in Grenada, which is nice and sunny and beautiful if you haven't been. And so if there's some noise in the background, I do apologize for that. One of the questions that guides me about your question, Joran, is, or saying, that may be familiar to a lot of us in the integral space, like as within, so without, or as below, so as above, so below, but mostly the as within, so without. And so what I've observed both in myself and with colleagues and also just other facilitators and coaches is that the way that we show up in the facilitation, a coaching session, a teaching session, the way we show up is going to be largely impacted by what we're showing up with. Our sense of self, our the multidimensionality of our identities, whatever we come with, our social positions, all play out in the way that we are facilitating. And if we're not aware of that, I think it just means we're not aware of it, and we ought to be. So for me, one of the message in that piece, and even in the being quadrant, is presence and awareness. And I think someone just put something about presence in the chat. How much are we present to ourselves? And it's a little bit of a dancing act, because we ought to be present of ourselves while also being present of the other, what's going on in the other quadrants, as Joran has been saying, and you'll likely hear us talk about more. So this piece about recognizing ourselves as the instrument, I mean, all dimensions of ourselves, so even I'm Afro-Caribbean. So when I show up in a room, I was with some teachers in Charleston this morning, and bringing those parts of my identity to locate myself. It's like, I don't live in Charleston. I sure work in Charleston. So your reality is definitely not my reality. And I'm not going to pretend as though that's not the case. So naming, owning that. And likewise, my reality is not theirs. And so we can use that information, though, that reality, that fact, to actually have an incredibly transformative exchange, conversation, dialogue, whatever the experience is like. So I think it's also a call, even though I don't really say this much, but I think it's also a call or an opportunity to reveal more of ourselves to each other, which I think deepens the interaction of whatever it is that we're facilitating. So I think that's mostly what's on my mind to say at this point.
Thanks, Akasha. I appreciate it. And Lauren, I have to cut to you. Akasha says it's kind of like a dance, right? So as a dancer, I have to ask you, what's that like for you when facilitating a group? What's that dance like, both figuratively and literally in the room with people, as you're trying to balance all of those quadrants and have one foot in all four, right? And be present to the work.
Hi, everyone. Lauren here. Former dancer. I have a BFA in dance and a Master's of Science in Organization Development, and there is a connection there. So let me just ask you, raise your hand or virtual hand. Has anyone ever done any social dance or line dance or anything like that where you have to
Does
either follow someone or
Does a flash mob count?
flash mob totally counts?
Okay, all right.
Okay, and so in that experience of dance, what was it like to when you were first learning? Does anyone want to speak to that? Or you can put it in chat.
I'll speak.
Hey.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, Joran. I think it's always difficult to come from an area of expertise to all of a sudden now you're brand new at something. And it's always very humbling to walk into not really being a master of something. So, you know, dance, like with anything else, I think it's just hard to not be great at something right off the bat. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much. So there's a learning aspect and a newness. And how about for some of the others here, even if you haven't danced and you might be familiar with it, how is facilitating a meeting kind of like a dance?
Well, I'll build on what Rachel said. Hi, Mike here. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Mike.
I was part of a group that did Renaissance or Napoleonic dance, performed for events. And yeah.
That is awesome.
What struck us was, you know, if the group had 5 people that knew the dance and the 6th person that had just joined, they would know that dance within an hour or two, right? Whereas if it was a completely new dance to the group and one person had brought it to the dance, it would take, you know, several days, you know, several meetings before we would all get that dance down. So,
Yeah.
Right. And what was and what were some of the things that you learned in that process, you know, kind of tie it back to facilitation? How did that go?
I think how fast people can pick things up when it's being modeled by everybody around them. So I would think, and I'm not a professional facilitator, by the way, I feel much wiser for having gotten this book and halfway through it. But I would think from doing technical training that the more people understand the process you're trying to lead, the easier it is for people that are uncomfortable with it to adjust to it and start contributing, I would think.
Yeah, beautiful answers, both of you. Yeah. And so I'm always constantly finding that when you facilitate, there's kind of a performance aspect to it. Not that it's performative, but that in some ways you're kind of having to create a production. There's planning involved, and in the room, going back to the being piece, there is an element of felt experience, of knowing in yourself what might come up with a trigger and being able to put that aside. That's the being piece. And at the same time, offering a process, a flow, a container, that's the behaving piece for for the people who are following or being led. And sometimes someone resists the leader because they want to lead instead. And can you follow that as a facilitator? Can you then follow the group and allow that role shift to take place? So I want to toss it back to Joran, and maybe you can speak to what is it like when you as a facilitator have to put aside the leading role and be more of a follower?
Yeah. We talk at length in the book in the 3rd quadrant section about the pushback. And that's a principle in the bonding section that happens when the group is either, like Lauren's describing, resistant to the process or resistant to the person facilitating, right? That both can be true. And it's really important to get as a facilitator, it's important to get that pushback early, right? We want those pushbacks early and often. We want to incorporate them. We want to acknowledge them. We want to, not try to fix or address them, but we want to feel like the person who is feeling a little outside the process or or not feeling included, we want to make sure that we involve them in some way. And there's tips in the book about how to maybe take them off to the side and have a conversation about what they need in that moment. Or, if somebody's being a dominant voice, right, and dominating the conversation and not letting others speak, instead of engaging the loudest voice, we want to engage the quiet voices and call on people who we're not hearing from. So there are actual, empirical behaviors that we want to see in facilitators to kind of make sure we're getting the best from the group. But for me, that's hard as shit. That's probably the hardest part, because not only as a coach and a parent and whatever else in my life, right, I'm the guy and a dude, right? Like, guys just want to fix things all the time. So it's like, I want to show up and be like, okay, let's stop everything. How can I make that better for you? Right. And that's not the job in that moment. So that's difficult. That's very difficult. And it takes practice, it takes time. I'm going to go back to the mural, and we're going to move into the next section, which is quadrant 3, bonding, which we've already kind of touched on here, and talk about that. So quadrant 3, that collective interior, this is that space for language, stories, culture, shared beliefs, covenants, charters. They call it the we space, that interpersonal space. The bonding section consists of things like, energy. There's something that's happening. There's something that's being exchanged between the facilitator and participants, or maybe among the whole group. Sometimes we feel that, sometimes we say the spirit moving in the room, right? There might be this element of presence or gravitas that we talked about, and here Edwin Friedman has a lot to say about showing up for the group as a non-anxious presence, not coming in the room with that baggage, either from the night before or from the last client that you dealt with that you're now projecting onto this new client, right? Showing up as a non-anxious presence for the group. Here's another section, authority, now based not on experience, but authority based on position. This is what we called esteem. So it's important for the CEO or the chief innovation officer or the head of HR, whoever brought you in as a facilitator or a consultant, to actually transfer esteem to you in the beginning of the session, introduce you, talk a little bit about how they met you and some of the work you've already done together, so that the group begins to understand who you are and that you're there for their best interests, right? That trust is starting to build up. Trustworthiness being another element in quadrant 3. We talk a little bit about intuition and using your instinct. Reaching out with your feelings, Luke, is an example of using your intuition in group settings. Some skills in negotiation, right? For anybody familiar with the book Getting to Yes, we break down separating the people from the problem, or focusing on interests and not the positions, right? So you're collectively negotiating outcomes and objectives with the group. Always remembering that humor, like beauty, is subjective, and that when you may have a joke in your back pocket, right, that you might, like quadrant 4 style, have a joke book hanging out of your bag or something you bring in as a tool, but their group conscience, their sense of humor as a group might not be aligned with yours. So being aware of that, and then having a trust in the process, having a trust in the others there to do the work, that they have the potential to do it. And just like everybody on the call has said so far, they learn quickly, and they learn by watching, and they learn by doing. So continue to model what you want the group to do, and how you want them to behave. And then those problem areas in quadrant 3, like I said, projection, preaching, unethical leadership. There might be toxicity in a culture that you come up with. Might look like avoidance, competition. There might be some mansplaining happening, or womansplaining. I don't know. There might be some splaining happening in the room that you have to deal with. Lack of closure, and again, back to that bringing in undealt with baggage into new sessions with new teams. We deal with the we talk about the team dynamics cycle there in another section of the book. oh, why am I blanking on the guy's name? The team dynamics curve, forming, storming, norming, performing.
Huckman.
Huckman, thank you. Bruce Tuckman. And so excessive socializing, right? Like people like not being focused in the session, domineering people, which we talked about, and just not having the right chemistry or the right people in the room. There are different personalities, strengths, skills, literacies, competencies that you want to be sure to include. And that's a problem area to watch out for. So again, the pushback from Michelle is the contribution to this section. But again, I want to open it up to any of the contributors to talk about quadrant 3, bonding, and what you've seen and why it's important to understand it. Mark, Lauren, Akasha.
Well, the thing that I got present to is, and I made a comment in there, I got present to the fact that by keeping things separate between that client and the one you're about to go into the room and facilitate, often felt I was doing a better job there than I was in my personal life. Like as a parent, I was often just like bleeding between, but part of the ability for me in being able to maintain for a client is a lot of the pre-work, making sure that I've thought through contingencies. So this is where we're trying to get to. Here are the activities we're going to do. There are certain activities that are must-haves or something that are less precious. So if a conversation needs to go longer, you can jettison certain things. So part of that, the mechanics of the craft is the thing that if you have that down, then you can be more present and more able to kind of maintain that being and that proper energy that's conducive and deal with, a room full of personalities, and you're one of them. But it's that for me, it was that was much harder if I was going into something where I didn't fully think through how things were going to go and kind of the exercises, the going to the gym and doing those things for the moment when you actually need your strength to do something. If you hadn't put the time in, that's where I ran into problems in that maintaining the space on behalf of the group.
Love that. And Mark, what I heard you say is, that you kind of mentally prepared, you're mentally rehearsed when you enter a session. And right. I hear some people, I don't know, maybe have conflict around that. Like, I don't want to rehearse too much. And it kind of goes back to the music metaphor too, right? You don't want to have too many dress rehearsals because then the show is going to be shit, right? And you're going to have this really
gone out in that.
You use it all up, and yeah. But I think for me, that's what rehearsal and preparing is for. Even if it's mental rehearsal, even if it's kind of identifying the decision tree that if this, then that. For me, entering the room then as a facilitator, that rehearsal now removes choice for me in the moment. I don't have to think about what to do if that happens. I'm prepared with a few things. Oh yeah, when I ran my scenario, this was option C, so I guess I'm going to do this, right? And the more I am able to prepare and rehearse, and I know people are divided on that. They just want to maybe go into the room and kind of be in the moment and respond and surf and and be with the group and stay curious and go where it flows, and I think there's something productive about that, depending on what the objective or the outcome of the session is, right? But there's also, I think, something to be said for being prepared and not feeling caught off guard.
Yeah, whatever allows you to be in the space and start building that shared energy is something you can actually lean on. Like sometimes when you have that, like your brain you lose your state and you're like, but if you've built trust and people know you're there to help and you're not trying to control anything, you're trying to draw things out, then a lot of times you can find allies within the room that'll help you get things back on track or create that, help share in that energy, because it can't all generate from you either, because that's exhausting. If it is all coming from you, there's probably something else you need to check in on with the team. Like something just happened in an all hands meeting before this and all these employees are checked out or something else is happening.
Yeah. I feel like there's like we mentioned that in the books at some point too. It's like, don't let yourself as the facilitator do all the lifting, right? Make it so that everybody is sharing in the work. And and feeling like you're accomplishing things. And I do have to say, there were moments in my past where I felt like I dropped the ball in a session and messed up royally, and felt really vulnerable. And at that point, you know, your body gets, you got this cold sweat thing happening. You're like, oh my God, I totally messed up, and everybody can see me. That whole moment, like where your world collapses, probably lasts 10 seconds and nobody else notices, right? It's one of those things like in performance too, like nobody really, if you just sing a bad note or play a bad note, just keep going, right? No, absolutely no one noticed except you. And I've had to learn that in facilitation too, like just keep going. That was a you moment. Don't let it color the work, and don't let it throw you off balance. Lauren, Akasha, anything from you both here in quadrant 3? Bonding. Lauren?
I'm off mute. Can you remind me the question?
Well, just anything that you feel is worth discussing in quadrant 3. Like, why is this important? Why is the interiority of the collective important to focus on and kind of deal with on its own?
So I would invite you all to think about when was a meeting or workshop that you were a part of? Can you think of a moment where there might have been a lack of trust, maybe miscommunication? When we talk about the word bonding, somehow that wasn't happening in this experience. And just in your head, think about what were some of the behaviors that you saw in the room that indicated there might be a lack of bonding here. And then think about maybe another meeting that you had where things seem to be going well and there seemed to be more of a closeness between the participants. And what were some of your indicators that that was happening? And maybe if there was a facilitator, was there anything that they did that enabled that experience? And I know it's just a short period of time, so I'll invite you to share some comments, but just bottom line, anything that came up for you when I prompted that.
I'll just say, I think my story is fun. Not at the time, it was tragic, but it's a story. So it was more an example where the group bonded against me in the end.
That's the thing.
And that was challenging. Yeah. I'll tell it some appropriate time if anyone wants to hear the tale of my woe.
You know what, Mike? That I've had that happen to me as well. And I've actually, I know your specific story, but what was offered to me from a mentor was that in this case, that was actually a good thing. Mm-hmm. because it showed an advancement of the group dynamics. They had a common enemy, and the enemy was me. And sometimes you have to be the lightning rod as the facilitator. Oh, I see a comment in chat. So
and David just raised his
hand.
Oh, go for it. Yeah. So we'll go David, and then I'll read Katya's comment in chat, or you can read it out loud.
Yes. So am I on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So I've quite a few clients in Europe, across Germany and across France. And it took me a while to learn this, but especially like in France and in Germany, their whole educational approach is in school, they learn to poke holes in ideas. And so if you're facilitating, I mean, I was just with a group in Paris Tuesday of this week, and it happened, and it freaked me out again. It sounds like they're criticizing you. It sounds like they hate the material. And I've been doing this a few years, and I know how to translate it, but it still psychs me out sometimes. And so what I do is I remind myself, and this is good in all scenarios, not just with the French, is remind myself that they're not attacking me. I mean, I'm in front of the room because I believe in this material, and the material will stand on its own. And so if somebody doesn't like it, that's okay. You know, I don't get defensive if somebody doesn't like it. I say, oh, tell me about that. Oh, you don't think this works? Okay, good. And so I've learned to calm myself and to center myself from the dialogue, because, you know, it's not about me. we're here to talk about the ideas and then to bring these ideas into our practice. And so when I remind myself of that, it really helps, it brings my anxiety way down.
And I'm hearing another facilitation competency, and that which is curiosity. Tell me more. And I do this almost this movement of the energy is coming in, and I'm funneling it back into the group, and that's a big part of it. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, Katja or Katya. Would you help me out?
Katja POE. I'm not from France, but from Germany. So thanks for your insight, David. Yes, we tend to really question things. And for me, it's always a point of everything you was mentioned there, I can turn into a learning as well, because as long as somebody questions the idea, I can always have a new idea about it, or more ideas about what that journey might be heading to as well. So I really appreciate it, but it's my culture. So for me, it's just another idea. I haven't had the chance to facilitate huger audiences in US, but in very different continents until now. And for me, the most important thing about bonding is that you are not just a bunch of people. So I always start with something personal, asking stupid questions or silly questions, like not what's your favorite new movie, but what was the worst movie you ever saw, or something which is really not work related, and let people do something different than that what they expect to have in a business meeting. And I think this really makes the difference between being just on that more or less interesting topic, but also notice that they are together with other humans, which might also raise more laughter during the meeting. So this is my go-to.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Katja. And your chat too, what you mentioned in the chat too was that, the importance to make the distinction between a work group and a team, right? If you're a work group and you're kind of working in silos and you're adding up your individual, sums of your effort and working like a gymnastics team, that's one thing. But if you're working more interdependently and you need to function like a hockey team and pass the puck to one another, and you need to be able to have communication guidelines in place and maybe have some kind of chartering as to how you're going to make decisions, right? The team culture is going to feel different than a work group culture, right? And so I think
yes, and you need at least every minute is a well-spent minute regarding that culture, because it makes things so much faster afterwards. And I really can observe that people in Teams meeting mute themselves and don't say a single word until the meeting starts. So, and really try to break this habit up as fast as possible, because in an on-site meeting, you will not be silent for 5 minutes while waiting. So that's just kind of a stupid waste of time. It adds no value in any kind.
Love it. Let me go back to the mural because I want to get to our Q&A. And let's see, we've talked about bonding. Oh, here at the end of the book, what page is this on? This is on page 255. So it's back in the appendix. We give everyone a scorecard with all of the lines of development that we've mapped in each of the quadrants. So in behaving, you've got things like preparation. We've talked a little bit about listening, reflective listening, inquiry, right? Curiosity, all of that. And then in building, you've got your models, frameworks, metrics, artifacts, assets, content, tools, and then you can grade yourself or others using this facilitator scorecard to give you kind of a cumulative score. And showing whether you are, kind of the competency isn't evident, is it emerging, is it something you're really a master of? So if you're looking to really develop yourself as a teacher, trainer, coach, facilitator, we offer this as a tool. to use in the back of the book. Okay, looks like we have one question in the Q&A. It is, and I'm sure there's more, and we can just open it up here after this. But the question here is this book for an audience of a certain skill level? For example, better for new facilitators or good for experienced facilitators? Let's see. Who is this book for is the question. I'm going to open it up to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd say both. If a resource like this existed when I was first tapped on the shoulder to try and facilitate a session, on one hand, it would kind of be overwhelming because I'd have that beginner's gap issue of like, ooh, there's a lot more here than I want. But the maximizer in me would have appreciated understanding there's a lot to grow into here, and you know, have a way to actually assess where I have existing strengths, and then practice mindfulness around the areas where I'm learning. So I would say that it's definitely having participated in the book and having read the book. It is now an extremely, I think I mentioned this in the chat, I was like, it's a great tool for mindfulness as you're in an advanced, you know, facilitation skill set. Certain projects and certain customers are going to pull you into a certain thing where you have most recently practiced a particular type of facilitation. So the book again kind of helps you kind of stretch out again and get out of the shape you put yourself in for that most recent experience and kind of get back to a more robust mindfulness of a larger practice. So I'd say it hits both ends of the spectrum. So.
Thanks, Mark. And I do too. I think, you know, I'm close to it. I'm biased. I've been looking at it and proofreading it for just over 3 years. So I think everybody should get it, right? I think everybody can get something from it, but you know, I'm close to the material. Lauren, what do you think?
Having read the book, I definitely think that it's a good primer if you are new to facilitation. So I would say great for somebody who is early in the process, but also good for somebody who is a tenured facilitator who might want to level up in certain aspects of facilitation. You know, if you're someone who is a leader and a project manager, I think it's good for those types of people to have a sense of how to facilitate meetings. They might not need the whole book. They might need just kind of some of the basic framing of it. And that's what I would say.
Okay. Akasha, what about you? Are you in a spot where you can respond? Yeah, like who do you think a book like this is for? Like who should get it? More beginner or mid-level, advanced?
Yeah, so my response is very similar to all three of you. And I was driving with my friend just now, and she was asking me about the book. And she's very new to facilitation. And she was like, that sounds very interesting to me. So I'm going to take her word over my word about it and be the new facilitator. And it sounded interesting to her. I would happily recommend it to her and then get her feedback. So I think similar to the three of you, people can find something in it for themselves, irrespective of where they are in terms of their facilitation experiences and experience. And yeah, I think there is something for just about everyone. I'm just glad the book is out there. You know, to Mark's point, there's a book out there that says facilitation. Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a gift to many people.
Thanks, Akasha. I want to open it up then with the remaining time we have. It's about 10 minutes left. with no more gold stickies on the mural, just kind of opening it up for Q&A. Are there questions you have about the book or for any of the contributors here that we have on the call for Lauren, Mark, or Akasha? Mike, go ahead. Oh, and then Frank. I think Frank raised his hand too. So Mike first and then Frank.
Okay, well, I might, because I can kind of lead into my question going off the last question. I would consider myself facilitator adjacent, right? I've been facilitated many times. I managed a learning and development team where my senior staff were great facilitators, right? But I've done more instruction. I felt like the book leveled me up, to use Lauren's terms. I feel I'm about halfway through. I feel like I know a lot and I need to practice, which I think Mark referred to. Yeah, I know more than I can do, but I'm just I'm very excited about this book. Leading into that, I've been running into a situation more and more recently where I'm hearing the word facilitator when I would have expected the word instructor for the given activity. And I was tempted to say versus, but I'd really maybe better ask it. Could y'all, with your experience, kind of contrast and compare the difference between instructor and facilitator?
Mark, I kind of wanted you to kick this off because I know you kind of have a philosophical position on this, right? So why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, I come in my background. I had instructional design, CD-ROM authoring for those of us old enough to remember CD-ROM. So a lot of authorware and director and that kind of thing. So thinking through a topic, breaking it down, and putting it out in chunks that someone can learn and then show proficiency in a very guided way, very much like modern LMSs do. And for me, the difference in instruction is kind of the agreement up front about, are you on a path where you are open to being taught something in a very specific way? Is an instructor who gets to play by certain rules. Facilitators, it's more of the requirement is one, it's more than just a single person on a independent learning path or an instructor guiding people that are pretty much in lockstep along a journey to learn a math or science or whatever. It's more of a participatory activity where the outcome is not something that's in my head that I'm just telling you slowly over time as a teacher. The outcome is actually something that I have no idea what it's going to be, but we're going to get there together. And so facilitator is, that's why this book, that's why businesses trying to figure out how do we adopt design thinking or how do we bring these new ways of working, because VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, is the world we're in post-pandemic. So we need to, we each have a percentage of the overall solution locked away inside of us somewhere. So facilitators just trying to draw it all out so we can all see everyone's Lego pieces and go, okay, now what could we build with it that's desirable and viable and feasible?
All right. Well, I think the book's very clear, by the way, early on what facilitation is. Lauren, thank you. I see your text. I get it. I thought maybe I was missing something in modern instruction.
No, I think you got it. Yeah, it's yeah, Mark, well said. Well said.
Thank you.
It's just according to me. So, you know,
according to Mark, gospel according to Mark Tippin. Frank, next question.
Is that so? Can you hear me? I
Yes.
installed a new speaker and it.
Sounds great.
It's the first time I'm using it now. I think this book is would be a good antidote to top-down or hierarchical kinds of cultures, corporate cultures, and also classroom cultures, where it provides keys to to develop a little bit less ego-ness and facilitate, as it were, ego-lessness in trying to facilitate or enhance a group interaction. I lived for years in Asia and taught there for a long time, and found it very difficult to work democratically with groups of people, either groups of professors and also with college students, even high school age students. They were so used to looking up to the teacher, revering the teacher, and they kept their damn mouths shut all the time. And it was very difficult to break through that. And I was thinking of my years working in governmental, nonprofit governmental organizations in South Korea. We were wondering why, people wonder why they put in so many hours working, way beyond the 8-hour day, way beyond the 10 or even 12-hour day. Well, during business hours, they seem to be locked into this hierarchical structure where they always are deferring to the person in authority or to the older individual who has more authority by age, even if they don't know a damn thing or less. Okay. But afterwards, when they're out of the office, they go to the pub, they go to the restaurant, they open up the soju bottles, and that's where the real communication and the real work is done. Where people are sitting on the floor or on long tables or whatever, and they're interacting with one another, sharing food, sharing drinks, and all of a sudden things become much more egalitarian and everyone is being listened to, or at least more so than before. That's what I found most interesting. So this book to me is a great resource book, because it's helping me get out of the hermitage I've been living in the last couple of years. It's reminding me how to reflect on my past experience with groups and getting me into. Actually, I want to introduce this book to a group of Indians in Pune, India, who I interact with almost weekly. They need to learn how. I don't think they've even thought that facilitation or group interaction was even something you could do. It is something that they would kind of do by rote and kind of be kind of lost in how to organize themselves. This would provide some kind of structure.
Love that. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. Rachel, I think we got like 1 minute left. Do you want to have the last question here? Hopefully people can hang for one more question.
Yeah, it's kind of a big one. So I'll just throw it out there, I guess. I mean, ultimately, the book really sounds like it's a great tool to improve on all aspects of leadership and just to be a better person, right? But what is a good way to introduce the concept of facilitation to organizations, that would very much benefit from the idea of that kind of service and coordination? I'm very curious because, I'm in a position in many aspects of my life to introduce this service, right? And because of some ambiguity, it's more difficult than maybe it needs to be. So what do you suggest from your perspective on how to maybe simplify the explanation of what is possible with bringing in a quality facilitator?
Love it. Jay's responding to that too.
So we run into this all the time internally. Even if you have organizations that buy into the value of facilitation, they don't know how to effectively utilize facilitation. So the biggest way I could simplify it is this: are there any problems that your teams have been trying to solve for a long time that you're still struggling with solving? That's the question I ask. If you had the resources and abilities and structure and methodologies to be able to solve that problem, you would have done it by now. Yet it's still these big things that are needing to be solved and visualized in a way that haven't been visualized and solved yet. So that's the value of what a facilitator can do for you. They can help bring the brain power that already exists and formulate new perspective of ways. And not only that, you have a visual artifact that you can then share with leadership as to the value that facilitator brought to the table in your
Awesome.
organization.
That's a great soundbite. I'll have to go back and listen to that and take some notes. That was brilliant. Thank you for that. And I think that spoken with true conviction would definitely sell the concept. So thank you.
Yeah. By the way, Jay's good for that. Like just kind of creeping on a call with the camera off and then coming in at the end with the drop the mic moment. Like that's his MO, by the way.
I love it.
So thank you everyone for being on the call. I know Dave and Lauren had to jump. I went ahead and I put the link to the book in the chat. If you don't yet have a copy, it looks like some of you already do, which is amazing. Like makes my heart like the Grinch, like swell 3 times bigger, you know. You guys are already doing it. But if you don't already have it, go ahead and click on the link, and we'd love it if you would buy the book, check it out, leave us a review on Amazon. And just like Frank said, like spread the word. Like if there's a group of people or 1 or 2 people in your life who you think could benefit from this, you know, compendium, right? It really is a collection of contributions. Then by all means, share the book with others. And thank you so much for making time in your day to be with us, to have this conversation. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Akasha, for being my special guest and for your invaluable contributions to the book itself. Everyone, it's Friday, so have an amazing rest of your day and a great weekend. And if you guys need anything at all in the meantime, have questions, we're not hard to find. Go ahead and reach out via email. And thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time. Next time we do one of these.
Thank you. Great to meet everyone.